Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. What is going on in Australia? It's getting more insane every single day. Yesterday, we played a bunch of clips here, but there's relevancy here to America as well because we have a similar reason as to why things are going off the rails. More so there than here, but that perhaps could be our crystal ball. It's a classic city versus country divide. We talk about this on at least my radio show a lot because it's a tale as old as time. Thousands of years ago, Aesop, right? One of Aesop's fables, city mouse and country mouse. Okay, so this has truly been a divide amongst people for thousands of years. Let's start in Australia first. So yesterday we played videos of police officers in Australia stomping on people's heads, choking women for not wearing a mask, body slamming people's skulls into the ground, like awful stuff to keep you safe, of course. It's all to keep you safe. Here's another one. Listen to what the police officer says as this guy's being arrested with 3 officers on top of him. Check it out.
It's not necessary.
And we've given you a direction to move on.
I understand
and
that.
Not return.
He's not returning his own. He lives a block away.
Yeah, but he has no.
So what do you
reason,
mean?
He has no reason to be here. He doesn't have a valid reason to be out today. He wasn't wearing a face mask.
Hold on. He has a face mask in his pocket. He was just smoking a cigarette. He just came to get lunch with
You don't
me.
understand the whole picture anyway.
Oh, what do you mean? I've been living here this whole time.
I love that lady's attitude. Oh, what do you mean? Did you hear what the officer said? We gave him direction to move on. And he was arrested because he had no valid reason to be here. no valid reason to be here? What are you talking about? What kind of country? You have no valid reason to be here. Holy cow. So we talked with Nick Adams yesterday. He's from Australia. And so what is the cultural, what's up with Australian culture that this is a thing? Like what is happening to Australia? And the first point he wanted to make is that you, Slater, and other Americans have been hoodwinked about Australia. Australians are not all Crocodile Dundee, right? No, Australians are not all the Crocodile Hunter. That's Hollywood. So I got to put that thought to death, right? Not every Australian is Crocodile Dundee. Here's the big cultural divide in Australia. 89% of Australians live in cities. Like there's 5 big cities in Australia: Perth, Melbourne, Sydney, whatever. 89% of Australians live in one of the cities. Do you know what it is in America? In America, which is about the same land mass as Australia, only 30% of Americans live in big cities. It's a big difference. Now, people who live in cities are more compliant, more progressive worldview. City folk are more independent from each other, even though they're squished in closer to each other. They're more densely connected, right? But they're more independent from each other socially. So therefore, they become more dependent on the government and more compliant. Rural folk in Australia and here in America are more dependent on each other, therefore care less about the government. Generalities, of course, but that's a major factor here. And this goes back to our founding. Thomas Jefferson wrote a ton about this. He said that farmers are the most valuable citizens and truest republicans, small r, republic, like small government people. He thought that our cities were corrupt. He wrote this to James Madison in 1787. James Madison, 1787, he said, when we get piled upon one another in large cities, as in Europe, we shall become as corrupt as in Europe. He said cities are pestilential, like a pestilence, disease. They're disease-ridden. Cities are diseases to the morals, the health, and the liberties of man. The word pestilence there could not be more timely. We'll get to that a little more in a minute. Jefferson believed in his ideal agrarian society that everyone should learn Latin and Greek and live on a farm and grow your own food and build your own shelter and spin your own clothes, because only then are you truly free. When you don't have to rely on other people, then you're truly free, and only then. And think about that. When you rely on someone else for your food and your water, as I do, Are you really free? He said, those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, whose breasts he has made his peculiar deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. So God put virtue into the chests, into the hearts of those who get their hands dirty. That's what he's saying there. It is the focus in which he, God, keeps alive that sacred fire, which otherwise might escape from the face of the earth. Country folk. He went on to say the mobs of great cities add just so much to the support of pure government as sores do to the strength of the human body. That is to say, they don't. Do sores add to the strength of the human body? No. Well, that's what mobs of people do in our cities. Ouch. So again, Australia, 89% of Australians live in cities. A great line, again, from Jefferson. He said, dependence begets subservience, right? So dependence, right? People in cities are dependent on, well, let's just say people in the country for food. We'll start with that, right? But they're dependent on the government for everything, for their own safety even, right? Because you're not allowed guns, you can't protect yourself. So you got to rely on the government to do it. Dependence begets subservience, and that's what we're seeing in Australia and here in America, and venality, which means corruption, and it suffocates the germ of virtue. Now, one of the main reasons why Jefferson felt this way about cities was disease. And this brings us to today. There are tons of diseases back in Jefferson's day, obviously. Smallpox, yellow fever, dysentery, measles. 90% of George Washington's Continental Army that died, 90% of the deaths in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War were from disease. 90%, not warfare. They weren't from bullets, they were from diseases. Jefferson wrote a letter to Benjamin Rush, Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of our founders, one of the signers of the Declaration. He was the doctor of our founding fathers. And he said, God can make good things come from bad things. And Jefferson said the yellow fever that is in America will discourage the growth of great cities in our nation. He actually proposed that cities, every other block be open space, right? And that way people will be less dense and people can breathe less toxic air. And a couple cities actually tried this. New Orleans was the biggest city that actually tried this, where every other block was park, but eventually they filled in the open spaces. But here's where it comes to today, right? Because there's nothing new under the sun. We've done everything before. 1793, right? Washington, D.C. was founded as the nation's capital in 1790. Congress didn't meet there till 1800. It took about 10 years to build out, right? So in the meantime, the capital of America was in Philadelphia. Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State. He lived in the city. And yellow fever ran through the city. 50,000 people lived in Philadelphia at the time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was the biggest city in the country. 50,000 people, biggest city in the country. It was the second biggest city in the English-speaking world behind London. Pretty amazing, right? So this is a big metropolitan city at the time, the biggest. And yellow fever swept through the city. 1 in 10 people were killed. 10% of people died from the yellow fever. That would be the same as, I live in San Diego County, which is bigger than half the states in the country. That would be the same as 350,000 San Diegans dying. 350,000. We've had 4,000 die in San Diego County. Think about that. Nationwide, this would be the same if we had the same proportion as the yellow fever that swept through Philadelphia in Jefferson's day. We would have 33 million Americans dead. If Thomas Jefferson could see all the hysteria around COVID, he would laugh in your face. So George Washington left the city, the Secretary of War left the city, the Treasurer, Alexander Hamilton, left the city, Jefferson stuck around. He wrote to Madison, he said, everybody who can is fleeing from the city. And he said, the panic of the country people is likely to add famine to disease. And that's where we are today, right? The famine part, that's the shortages. All the panic that we caused, shutting down everything. You see the ports all backed up and people not going to work and all this stuff and welfare, the whole thing, right? That's all the panic. That's adding famine, shortages, inflation to the disease itself, making it even worse. And that's thanks to the city folk. He had another line, he said, I'm not a friend to placing young men in our populous cities because they acquire habits and partialities which do not contribute to the happiness of their life. It means there's too much sinning going on. Too much sinning in these cities, so instead you got to go live in the country. The problem is, even though only 30% of Americans live in cities. Well, obviously the cities control everything, right? They control Hollywood, they control the news, right? They control Wall Street, they control businesses, like everything, every institution in America is run in our cities and by people who live in cities. And how do those people view you? Well, this is Barack Obama back in 2008.
They get better and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them. Or
You're a bitter clinger. You cling to your guns, you cling to your religion, you cling to your hatred of other people, you country folk. So that's one of the main COVID divides, city versus country. Now, I want to go back to the police officers in Australia and here in America. Police officers are in a really tough spot right now, and I don't envy the position you're in, because police officers are people. Police officers are human beings, and they're going to be given orders by their superiors. Well, getting the vaccine is one of those orders, right? But they're going to be given orders against other people. Orders like, go arrest that person for not getting the vaccine. Or whatever the unjust order is. And we're seeing police officers in Australia act in ways that you would never fathom would ever happen. And each police officer is going to have to figure out what their line is that they will not cross. I'll give you an example. San Diego Unified, just yesterday, it's like the third biggest district in the country, or something like that, fifth big, whatever, one of the biggest school districts in the country. All 16-year-olds need to get vaccinated. LA Unified just voted on this a couple weeks ago, right? So kids need to be vaccinated. That's coming. It's going to be coming for 5-year-olds any day now, right? So all kids need to be vaccinated, okay? Otherwise, you're not allowed to go to school. Okay, what if the kid keeps going to school? Okay, you got let's say a 14-year-old kid, unvaccinated, shows up to school. Keeps showing up to school. Is told they can't go to school, but keeps going to school. What's the school going to do? Arrest the kid? Are they going to arrest your 14-year-old? Maybe they'll come and arrest you. Will they? How could they? Who would do that? I don't know. If you're a police officer, would you? Would you arrest a kid? Would you put a kid in handcuffs for showing up to school unvaccinated? Would you go to the home of parents who keep sending their unvaccinated kid to school and arrest them along with Child Protective Services? I don't know. Would you? Draw your line. This is a video out of Italy. Italy's crazy. Italy has vaccine passports and the whole thing. There's been a lot of protests about it. I don't know the exact context of everything in this video, but we're going to roll with it. It looks like we have a line of police officers. This is a anti-vaccine vaccine passport protest. And you have a line of police officers in their riot gear take their helmets off and stand down against their neighbors. And the crowd, of course, cheers because of it. But what a ridiculous thing to have riot-geared police officers, right? And I wonder if police officers have ever really had to contemplate this in their lives to this extent. Because you must, police officers, you must. What is your line of orders against fellow Americans that you will not cross? Because you're going to be asked to do things. You're going to be ordered to do things that are unjust and unreasonable and unconstitutional and unlawful. What's a cop to do? Because the excuse, the line, the justification that has led, I would say the justification that has resulted in the worst atrocities in human history. More inhumane genocide has occurred because of the justification, I was just doing my job, than any other justification ever. Wait, right? You with me on that one? Right? There's going to be a few people at the top who say we should throw all the Jews in ovens. But the vast majority of people who are throwing the Jews in ovens said, I was just doing my job. I was just doing what I was told. Got to feed my family too. What do you expect me to do? What do you want me to do? I'm just doing my job. So police officers, you're awesome. Thank you for serving and enforcing the just laws that are enacted by a duly elected legislature. But you're also going to be forced perhaps one day to enforce unjust laws not enacted by a legislature, laws that violate the Constitution and your conscience, and decrees that if you were to enforce would cause you to violate the rights of a free citizen. Let me put it like this. Will you choke a woman for not wearing a mask? How about that question? How about that right there? That's a police officer choking a woman because she's not wearing a mask. Would you choke a woman for not wearing a mask? Most will. And you can't really come to terms with this until you realize that you would too. You very well could fall in line and do what you're told and say, oh, it's just this one thing, it's just this one time, it's worth it, she deserves it, it's important, it's necessary. And once we do this, then we can get back to normal, so it won't be long. If you don't know your potential capacity for evil that you're capable of, then you'll never take the steps to protect yourself from doing those evil things. I want to give you a friendly reminder to download our app in the App Store. It's totally free, and it's fantastic, and it's super easy to use. So it's for your phone, and it's for your TV, and I'm super grateful wherever you're watching us, of course, but if you're on the go and you just want to download it on your phone and take us wherever you are, couldn't be easier. Super easy interface. All the shows are right there. Click it, boom, ad-free, totally free. The app is free. There's no purchases in the app. It's absolutely free for your enjoyment. Just search for the First in the App Store. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. In today's edition of Life Lessons, we are going to talk about envy. Have you heard about this house? They call it a house in LA. They call it a giga mansion. It was on the market originally for $500 million. Now it's half off for $250 million. It's in the hills of Bel Air. 105,000 square feet. You heard that right. My house is 2,000 square feet, so this would be 50 of my house. Ridiculous. Now, it looks down on a house built by Mohammed Hadid. This is a real estate developer. He's the father of the model Bella Hadid. He built this house that was so big and stupid and illegal. It's half finished and they have to tear it down. Do we have a picture of the Hadid house, guys? That's the new one. That's the Hadid house. They have to tear that thing down. Right? And now they're selling the one on top of it for half off, right? No one will buy it because who would? Who would buy this? You're basically buying a soulless office complex. Why would you want to live in an office building, a giant soulless office building? So I want to spend some time on this because I think this brings up a really important lesson about envy. You're supposed to feel envious about this house. You're supposed to feel bad that you don't live in this house or a house anything like it, right? This is what luxury is, and you don't have it, so feel bad. That's the whole point of it. Why else have it? Why would you build a house that big if not to show it off and brag to people, right? So I'm reading this LA Times article about this house, and the developer is showing off in a kitchen with all these gimmicks, right? An iPad-controlled coffee and tea machine that stores its own chilled milk. Ooh. And the developer says this. This is one of the many, many, many kitchens. But we have a main kitchen at the lower level. This one probably no one will ever use, but it does have very cool things. So you're supposed to feel bad about this, right? You're supposed to feel bad that this house has many, many, many kitchens. How many kitchens do you have? One. one kitchen. I have many, many, many kitchens. Great. You know what's infinitely better about your kitchen, your one kitchen, than that person's many, 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 many kitchens? Your family is in it. You get to cook food for your family. And you get to eat food together around a table. The one table you have with chairs for each member of the family. You get to sit there and talk as a family. Here's the dining room of this giga mansion, right? It's a big office. This is like where you have conference. That's the dining room, right? Imagine having Thanksgiving dinner in that thing. That's not a home. It has a 10,000 bottle wine cellar. 10,000 bottle. Now, of course, the only reason to have that is so that you can brag that you have a 10,000 bottle wine cellar. But here's the thing. That game only works if someone else wants a 10,000 bottle wine cellar, right? So the exchange they want, this person's supposed to be like, oh, here's my wine cellar. It has 10,000 bottles. And you're supposed to be like, oh, that's amazing. Unbelievable. Wow, you're so great. The proper response is, so, that's seems pretty stupid. It has a private nightclub. That's the saddest place in the world. Right? All I see is the guy alone with laser lights and fog and the music pumping, and he's just all by himself in this nightclub. It has its own hair salon, but like, okay, part of living life is going places. What's a more meaningful existence? Getting your hair did in a private hair salon, or going out and spending time with your barber or hairdresser? Of course, being with people. The house is called The One. They call it The One because it's the biggest. It's The One. Neighbors are calling it The 11 because of Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But I think The One is an appropriate name because anyone who lives here, no matter how many people they're surrounded by, will feel absolutely alone. They'll feel like The One because it's not a home. Part of the house has a 4-lane bowling alley. Right? Look at this. There's a lot. There's also another picture. I don't know if you have it of the lobby of the bowling alley. It has 22 chairs in the lobby of the bowling alley. No one's ever going to be sitting in those chairs. You're going to be walking into this giant bowling alley all by yourself. Maybe one day you'll have a party and it'll be filled with people who you don't even know. And you'll feel even more alone than when you're actually there alone. Envy is a terrible thing. That's my point. Don't drink it. Do not drink envy. Do not be envious of anything. Ryan Holiday, the Stoic author, he says, ego leads to envy and it rots the bones of people big and small. Envy rots the bones. Now, Ryan Holiday is an atheist. I don't even know if he knows that he's quoting Proverbs 14:30 when he says envy rots the bones. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. Now, envy is a terrible thing. I got 3 ways to not be envious. You ready? If you ever feel a little bit of envy, I want you to remember one of these 3 things, if not all 3, so you can get it out of your heart immediately, because if it sits there, it will rot your bones. Okay? 3 ways to not be envious. Ready for the first one? Just don't. We don't give enough credit to that in our modern society. Like, what's your advice for how to not do a thing? Oh, just don't do it. We want these tricks and shortcuts and mind games and hacks. No, just don't be envious. Have a conviction that it's bad. Envy is a sin. It's one of the 10 commandments for the Lord. Repeat, thou shalt not covet. Don't covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his ox, donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. So just don't do it. There's so many stories in the Bible about envy. Cain and Abel, Esau, Jacob, Saul and David. The Jewish leaders who killed Jesus in Mark, it's one of the reasons why they hated Jesus so much is because of envy. James called envy demonic. So have a conviction that it's a bad thing and stop doing it. Stop having it. Cut it out of your heart immediately. It's a cancer. It will destroy you. It will rob you of the joy and contentment of the only thing you have in life, which is the moment. Don't let envy take you out of the moment. So instead of envy, take delight in the Lord. That's the solution. That's the first one. But if you want some tricks, I got some tricks for you, okay? Option number 2 on how to get envy out of your heart. Consider this. Consider, every time you feel envy, consider that maybe the person you're envious of is actually envious of you. It's so easy to be envious of someone with money or fame, but there's a good chance that that person is actually envious of you. And they're envious of you because of the things that money can't buy. I'll give you an example. Michael Jordan. Have you ever seen the Michael Jordan documentary? It's pretty good. There's a scene where he's in his hotel room and he's sitting on the couch there and he just wants to leave and go get some pizza. But he can't. He can't leave because there's a crowd of 1,000 people in the lobby going crazy for him. He can't go anywhere. He's trapped. He's literally a prisoner of his own fame. He can't go get pizza. So it's so easy to be jealous of Michael Jordan and jealous of Michael Jordan's fame. But consider that Michael Jordan is jealous of your anonymity. You're jealous of his fame. He's jealous of your not being famous. You ever thought of that? Ulysses S Grant, fascinating man. After the Civil War, after the presidency, he partnered with this guy in a pyramid scheme, or he was a victim of the pyramid scheme in Wall Street. So Grant and a bunch of other famous people, they got stuck in this thing and they lost everything. Grant died absolutely broke, but he desperately wanted to be rich, like many of the people around him. He was envious. His friend General Sherman, he said Grant lost everything in an attempt to rival the millionaires, right? So he was jealous of the millionaires who would have given everything, who would have given their everything to have won any of his battles. So Grant was envious of their money, but all the millionaires were envious of his accomplishments, of his achievements, of his battles. So if he considered that, geez, I'm envious of these people, but actually they're probably envious of me, he could have maybe rooted it out of his heart. Last way to get over this. Third trick. You need to know that if you're envious of someone for a reason, you have to take the whole package deal. So I can get envious of people in my profession. It happened recently to me. There's some girl who has this podcast. I don't know what her name is, but it's one of the top downloaded podcasts in the country. She used to be connected with Barstool Sports for a while, whatever. And I thought, how does this idiot girl have 1 billion downloads? Like, what's going on? I want 1 billion downloads. Why don't I have $1 billion? I work hard on my show. Why don't I have 1 billion downloads? And I was talking to a friend about it, and he goes, yeah, Slater, sure, you can have 1 billion downloads. But the reason she has 1 billion downloads is because she talks about sleeping with rich men in New York City. And she's like this disgusting, foul-mouthed person who's miserable. So do you want that? Would you trade all of it? Would you trade that? You would trade your, you want her $1 billion, but do you also, or 1 billion views, but do you also want that? So you got to ask yourself, would I trade my life for all of what this person has? And the answer is no way, not in a million years. You can't just be jealous of one part of someone's life. You have to take the whole deal. And then ask yourself, is it worth it? Right? Look at the big time millionaire CEO, right? You're like, oh, I wish I had his giant house. I wish I had his cars. I wish I had his, lived on the beach or whatever. Right? Well, you know what? The big time multimillionaire CEO, his kids hate him because he missed every single soccer game of their childhood because he was working 100-hour work weeks. So take the deal? You want the big house? Great. Of course you want the big house. You want your kids to hate you? Because you never saw them? You missed all their childhood? Work 100-hour work weeks? You good? You want the whole thing? Of course you don't. So be grateful where you are. Even if you don't have a 4-lane bowling alley in your house and many, many, many kitchens. Instead, build a life that money can't buy. True story. Mike Slater, we'll talk with the former congressman about all the backdoor shenanigans with this budget deal. Do that next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, got to talk about this budget that they say is $3.5 trillion. It's way, way more than that. We're going to talk in great detail about the budget coming up on the budget bill and just out of control spending on Friday's special here. We're going into great detail about how this bill is a total scam in a million different ways. Debt ceiling, all this nonsense. And how they say, well, here's Biden about what the real cost of the bill.
Every time I hear, and I drive my staff crazy, every time I hear this is going to cost A, B, C, or D, the truth is, based on the commitment that I made, it's going to cost nothing because we're going to raise the revenue.
I love that. It's amazing. It's so, to have the cojones to try that, that's going to cost $0. It's pretty spectacular. Dennis Ross is here, former congressman from Florida and director of the American Center for Political Leadership. Congressman, how are you, sir?
Very good, Mike. How about you?
Good to talk to you. Give us a little insight as a congressman about how what goes on behind the scenes. Who's whipping who to do what and to say what and to vote how, and what's going on in D.C. right now?
Well, right now, when we're talking about putting together a budget or we're talking about increased spending, what we're usually using as a baseline is the Congressional Budget Office's assumptions as to what the revenues are going to bring in and what it's going to actually cost, and that's where you come up with whether there's a pay for or not pay for. There's a lot of pressure right now on moderate Democrats to approve this budget, to approve this $3.5 trillion that is going to cost a significant amount of money. And no matter how much you say it's not going to cost anything, the president admits it's going to have to come from revenues that he's going to get from raising taxes, which is going to destroy the economy, which means you're not going to have the tax revenue that you think, and it's going to cost another $3.5 trillion that we're going to put in our debt and deficit. Right now, there's a lot going on behind the scenes because his credibility is at stake. And the Republicans aren't going to give an inch, and they shouldn't give an inch. And the moderate Democrats, including Joe Manchin and Christian Sinema, should not give an inch because this is a terrible, terrible path for this country to take.
Manchin, to his credit, wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about how, for all the reasons he won't vote for it. Are there other Senate Democrats that are secretly against it too, and they're just letting Manchin take the heat? Or is it a strict party vote, you think?
Well, any Democratic senator that's up for re-election in 2022 is probably against this in every way, shape, and form because they know the economy isn't doing what it was a year ago or 2 years ago. It's starting to be on the decline, and people for a while will blame it on the pandemic. But essentially, it's going to have to come down to what are we doing to incentivize economic growth. Increased taxes are not going to incentivize economic growth. It's going to have just the opposite. So these Democratic senators that are up for re-election that right now are saying we'll toe the party line do not want to toe the party line on this $3.5 trillion boondoggle.
So who's talking to who behind the scenes, right? Because does it all come down to Manchin and Sinema? Is that all targets are, all weapons targeted on these two to get their vote, or is there other behind the scenes talk happening?
I'm sure there's others behind the scenes. Look, Georgia right now, the two senators there that are still just can't believe that they're there after 9 months are probably looking at, what's going to happen now. We've got one up for re-election already. This isn't going to fly in Georgia. This isn't going to fly in some of these moderate states right now. I don't know if they have an exit strategy, and I think that's probably the biggest issue. How do they get out of pushing a $3.5 trillion spending bill and still save face? That's going to be the difficult thing. They've got a better chance of doing that than I believe they do of passing the actual bill. So there's a lot of arm twisting. There's a lot of hand wringing saying, I don't want to vote for this. I don't want to vote for this. Get it away from me. Give me something to hang my hat on to say this is why we didn't do it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. All right. So they're looking for an exit strategy. What does that look like? What could that look like? And then especially when they have this threat of the government shutdown, which is ridiculous.
Well, I think that's what happens is that there's a compromise on debt ceiling that will eventually get raised, and that compromise costs the Democrats the ability to have a $3.5 trillion package, but at least we save the country from going in debt and default. I'm not debt, but in default on its obligations. There will be most likely a government shutdown because look, Friday's the date. September 30th is the last day we can pay a bill because we haven't authorized anything after that. The Democrats are in total control. They own this government shutdown, and if this happens, which I think it will happen because I lived through several of these when we were in charge, it's going to have some political pushback on them. And that's going to make it even harder to do it, $3.5 trillion. So what I'm saying is they're looking for chits, if you will, to say, well, we'll spend this chit on this and this to make sure we don't shut down the government, to make sure that we raise the debt ceiling. But as a result of spending those chits, we're not going to be able to do the $3.5 trillion. Let's move on to the next issue.
Okay. the spin of it's going to be interesting because, as you said, how could Republicans be blamed if they do have a government shutdown? How could they be blamed for this when no Republican needs to vote for it?
Well, they're trying. They're trying to blame them now, saying because they've obstructed it in the Senate. That McConnell's obstructed it in the Senate because they won't take the $3.5 trillion along with the $1 trillion package and a debt ceiling increase. They've got to partial it out into at least single subject, and that's good for the Republicans. That's not going to really help the Democrats in the long run. I think you'll see that that they'll reach a deal, but the likelihood of the $3.5 trillion is still out there, but I think it's waning because nobody wants a government shutdown. Although it's only discretionary spending, it's not mandatory spending that's going to be shut down, which is only a fraction. I say 25% of the budget. But more importantly, the debt ceiling. We've never seen a debt ceiling default. Budget Control Act of 2011, which I was part of, had to do with raising the debt ceiling. But as a result, we put in sequestration that forced us to have to make cuts. And we actually did that under the Obama administration starting in January 2012. It did some good for the country. It really showed that we can live within our means, but we raised the debt ceiling. Now, there might be a similar negotiation there. But in any event, I don't see how they sustain a debt ceiling increase, avoid a government shutdown, a $1 trillion spending infrastructure package, and on top of that, a $3.5 trillion spending package. That's going to be tough.
What an absolute mess. On this point of accountability, I was reading something briefly the other day, and I don't quite know what this is. So hopefully you can steer me in the right direction. But someone was making the point that back in the day, a bill was presented, and they would add amendments. And there'd be like an accountability to it because here's my amendment, and then we're going to vote on the amendments, and now it's just one giant, massive behemoth of a bill that the leader puts forward, and you're either up or down, and there's no, like there used to be 400 amendments, and now there's no amendments anymore. Can you speak to that? Do you know anything about that?
Absolutely, I know something about that. To give you an example, when I first got elected with the Tea Party wave in 2010, we have to deal with a continuing resolution in January of 2011. And we are told by our leadership, now we're in charge, we're the Republicans, we're told, offer whatever amendments you want, cut the budget, do all this. And we did all that. And we spent, 600, maybe 1,000 amendments, cutting spending, all this other stuff. Then our leadership said, hey, that's fine and great. They took another bill, went to the Rules Committee, wiped out all our amendments and said, this is what we're going to vote on. That was our first introduction as conservative members of Congress with a conservative majority, allegedly, that said, we're going to do it our way. That process is being followed by both parties, and it usually happens in the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee will decide, regardless of what happens, on the floor, whether they're going to allow certain amendments or not. So I may have the best amendment, but it won't be allowed because the Rules Committee has ruled before that this amendment's out of order. We don't see that process. And Mike, that's what's really getting to me, and it should be appalling to the American public, Democrat, Republican, or whatever, is we're not letting the process take its shape. We're not letting it flow the way it was intended by our founders. Put the matters up there for a vote, up or down, then move on to the next one. We think that it has to be predetermined for whatever reason, and that's the only way we're going to put it up for a vote. Single subject is best. We don't have a rule that requires that, but the amendatory process should be allowed to take place.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of dysfunction now. When you have bureaucracies like the CDC and the Labor Committee or Labor Department enacting all these policies about eviction moratoriums and vaccine mandates. And then when you have Congress that is, as corrupt as in their process. Are there any Republicans that you think are really standing up and doing a great job here? Or does it not even matter because they have no say in anything anyway right now?
In Congress?
Yeah.
Republicans in Congress? Yeah, I mean, I still have a great deal of respect for my good friend Steve Scalise. I think that he is still he's doing his best to keep things moving to where we're the viable opposition. There's some good Republicans still up there. As we see the jockeying for what's going to happen in 2022, when I believe the Republicans take over the majority, you're going to see some other Republicans come to the forefront, not only to get involved in campaigns to elect more Republicans, but also to push an agenda, whether it be like another contract with America or something. I think you're going to see that start to shine probably just after the first of the year to help the momentum to gain the majority. I wouldn't count out Kevin McCarthy. I mean, he's paid his dues, but I don't know if the majority of Republicans are going to want to keep that same leadership that they've had for the last 10 years.
All right, we can only hope things get so bad that we have a bounce back of some really good leadership moving forward.
We need it.
Former
Mike.
Congressman, yeah, amen. Former Congressman Dennis Ross, Director of the American Center for Political Leadership at Southeastern University. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Mike. Always a pleasure.
Have a wonderful day. Come back. We'll get the latest on Christians who are currently still in Afghanistan. Do that next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, the administration, of course, wants us to stop talking about Afghanistan and stop looking over there, and we will not. This is Senator Hawley talking to the Secretary of Defense.
But first, before I do, Secretary Austin, I have to take issue with something you just said. I know this is an administration talking point. I've heard it out of the mouth of the press secretary and others. We are not leaving Americans behind. That was your quote of just a minute ago. With all due respect, sir, you have left, past tense, Americans behind. Isn't it true that you left Americans behind on August the 31st?
There were Americans that were still in Afghanistan and still
Yes.
are. We continue
Correct.
to work to try to get those Americans out.
Yeah, that's a yes. Let's not repeat, please, the frankly falsehood that we didn't leave Americans behind.
Amazing. Faith McDonald is here. She is the KGI Global Director of Advocacy, who's helping to get some of these people out of Afghanistan. Faith, how are you today?
I'm very well, especially after seeing Josh Hawley. He's one of my heroes. So
Oh,
hearing him
wonderful. Well,
talk-
he would probably say the same about you because you're the one actually working to get people out. What are you doing? What are you and other groups doing to get people out of Afghanistan still today?
Well, I'm just a little link in a big chain, and that chain is a wonderful chain of ministries and NGOs and all kinds of people who are working together and individually as groups, veteran groups, people like that. We just all found each other, some of us, and we know about each other and are helping to support each other. But my job was just, I knew a chaplain in the Anglican Church in North America, a chaplain to the military, and he asked me to be part of a group that was on Facebook with military veterans who wanted to get their interpreters out, and were just desperate to find a way. And God uses me to connect people with other people. I don't do a lot myself. My mind just goes, oh, this person should know that person. And so these guys, I knew that there were groups who were working, and one of the groups, the Vulnerable Peoples Project, my friend Jason Jones said, hey, Faith, can you start filling in some of these names on Excel sheet for us that are going to be flightless? So I started doing that, and I said, well, can I give you the names of some of the people that I'd like to get on those flights too? And they said, sure, everybody that we need to. So I started giving the guys and a lieutenant colonel from the Marines, woman, had her interpreter and his whole family to get out. So we just started working on that and trying to get out as many people as possible who are definitely left behind.
Well, it's true. In your experience, Faith, has our government been helpful in this effort or in the way, a hindrance?
They've been in the way. I'm sorry. I just have to be honest about it. It has not been a pleasant experience. I've been working on advocacy for persecuted Christians for almost 30 years, and I've had to deal with things like the Taliban and Boko Haram and the Sudanese government back in the old bad days and all these evil people, but that you expect that from them. You don't expect to have to work against your own government, and it's been very difficult because of what the government has done, taking the flight list and changing people on the planes for people that they want to be on the plane, bringing people over here that the government wanted and leaving our people behind. taking people off of planes who then get killed at the Abbey Gate. It's been horrific.
I got 30 seconds, Faith. What do you know about how Christians are being treated in Afghanistan today?
Oh, Christians they're going door to door trying to kill Christians, find out who the Christians are and kill them. The underground church in Afghanistan was the second fastest growing church in the world, and they're being slaughtered. So a lot of the work that's being done is to try to help them, to get them out. They need our prayers. They need our support.
KGIglobal.org for more information on how you can help. Faith McDonald, wonderful to talk to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you too, sir. Good to talk to you.
Thank you for your
God bless you.
prayers and what you're doing. Sorry, the word underground church is so wild. That's so, people have underground churches at risk of death, and we don't want to go to church on Sunday. I want to sleep in. Amazing. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.